evening talks on homeschooling with our teenagers. Tonight, I'm Krystel from Engaging Minds as of last night, and we have the lovely Nikki Roy's here, fabulous admin from the Cambridge Homeschool Facebook group, and introducing the lovely Dani Archer from the Study Nook. Dani is taking it away for us tonight. I'm just going to be in the background. So welcome, Dani. Welcome, Nikki. And thank you for being here with us tonight, and have a fabulous evening. I'll leave you guys to it.
Thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dani, and as we've mentioned, we've got Nikki. So we're going to talk tonight about, aim to have by 11 years. So the primary years in terms of the Cambridge curriculum. So I'm Dani. I have a graduate diploma in primary teaching. Taught a few different places, but most recently I was the former head of primary at a Cambridge curriculum school. I've taught New Zealand curriculum, Cambridge, New South Wales, and then IB-PYP. During that time, I've also completed a mini certificate in gifted education, and then I'm almost finished my limit certification, which is Learning Matters intervention training, so structured literacy intervention for students with diagnosed learning needs such as dyslexia, ADHD, ASD, maybe low working memory, and all of that. But I'm very passionate about the Cambridge curriculum. I've loved my time teaching it. I'm still working with students who are currently completing the Cambridge curriculum. And yeah, so we're going to jump right into it, I think. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of general. So we can talk academics, but they're still little people. And little people need time to be little people and play and socialize. So kind of my general starting point is that, yes, we want foundation skills to be in place, because if those foundation skills aren't in place, it's really hard to build upon those as they progress through the system. But overall, what we really, really want is to develop a love of learning, because a kid who is confident and loves learning is going to want to learn and keep learning. So that's really important. And then that balance as well. So balancing, maybe it's balancing a little bit of kind of that written academic work and then some practical elements or real life experiences. So yeah, just really creating that balance and keeping in mind that they are still young. So they are still kids. My other big point is experiences. So my experience with the Cambridge curriculum, particularly literacy, is that it's really hard to access those texts if they don't have the background knowledge to understand it. So I'm trying to think, there was a report that the students had to read one year. I think it might be the one I've included, actually, kind of to do with Titanic and things like that. But if they've had no experience of what the Titanic is, it's really hard to comprehend a text. Maybe it's a whole piece around, I don't know, the word ants is popping into my head, ants. If they've had no experience or exposure to ants, it's really hard to comprehend that text. So just lots and lots of experiences, getting out, doing things, talking about things. And to me, that's probably one of the most important things in those really early years, is give them as many experiences as possible. Use lots of words to create their vocab. Use descriptive words to develop that, and so on. Nikki, do you want to add anything in terms of that general side of things?
No, just reinforce what you've just said, Dani. We need to give our children the love of learning. It doesn't matter whether you're doing Cambridge or NCA, whatever. If I used to take children from the age of 11 to 18, and once that spark, that love of learning is switched off, it's really hard to rekindle it. And so if you're a parent who has younger children, get out the books, get your head out of the books and go and experience things, which is very much what you've just said. But there are key skills that need to be in place, whether it's Cambridge, NCA, ACE, whatever it is. There are things that have to happen if you want your child to sort of succeed really later on. And that success can look different for different children. But up to the age of 11, I think we all agree everybody I've talked to, we all agree that we want our children to have certain skills and certain ways of learning. And I know you're going to talk about the literacy and everything, but that has to be in place. And 11 is sort of the benchmark for it, Dani. Yeah, over to you.
I'm just going to carry on because you said something like what success looks different for every child. And that is so true, because if they do have other learning challenges going on, success might be these little tiny steps each year, but they're still improving. So that's really important to keep in mind as well. We're going to go through all these foundation skills they should have, but some kids are just not going to be there by 11. So it's about knowing your child. Is there anything else going on? And then making sure they're just improving every single year. All right. Okay, so my animations aren't working, so there's a lot of text on the screen at once. So we'll start with readings. This is something I'm really passionate about. And I've tried to break it into lower primary. So when I'm saying lower primary, it's kind of up until the end of year 3, and then upper primary, year 4, 5, 6. So in terms of lower primary, the very, very most important thing is letter sound correspondences. So that is looking at a letter and knowing that the letter A makes 2 sounds, A and A, and looking at the letter B and knowing that B makes the B sound. And then we want to the reverse of that as well. So we can look at the letter and we can read it, but we can also, no, I've gone completely right. We can look at the letter and we can read it, but then someone can give us the sound and we can write it down as well. So if you said to your child, what does the letter D look like? They know C into D, or donut up down, to form that. Decoding skills. So we're aiming for at a bare minimum of 90% accuracy when they're reading. So obviously students will have varying learning, their ability to read varying levels of texts. So when they are reading a text, ideally it's at a minimum 95% accuracy, ideally 97%. That's going to enable them to then comprehend and understand what they're reading. Because if their accuracy is down at 70%, they're using so much of their cognitive load to work out what each word is on the page, they're not actually taking anything in. So yeah, roughly that 95%. We want them to have a good bank of high frequency words. So to, the, they, them, those words that are used all the time. But then we also want them building a vocabulary bank. So they might not be able to read those words, but if we're using those words, or if we're reading to them like a story before bed at nighttime, we can choose texts that are pitched slightly higher, or authentic texts. And they'll start to develop that vocabulary just from listening to you talking about it, or maybe explaining some of those words to them. So that's what we mean by vocabulary bank. They might not be able to read it, but they're starting to kind of bank all those words away, so that when they need them, they've heard them before and they have a little bit of understanding about what they are. When we move into upper primary, I always say from year 4, this is where it kind of steps up a little bit. So we want all of that foundation decoding, that bank of high frequency words and vocabulary bank in place, so that when the level of the text steps up a little bit, those foundations are there to support them. So by upper primary, we're ideally reading a range of authentic texts. So these might be a written report. It might be a fantasy story. It could be like a recount. I'm thinking like Roald Dahl Boy or something, like a recount type story. So reading a whole range of those text types. And then we're really trying to have the student making inferences. So that's the implicit meaning. So they need to have that 95% accuracy, so that they're reading the words correctly. And then they're starting to put all the clues together to kind of read, what is that author actually saying? So they're not explicitly saying it. They're having to use all those clues and work out, oh yeah, I know that because the author said this, it means this. Again, that's where those background knowledge and experiences starts to come in, because if they haven't experienced something or have no knowledge about it, it's really hard to make that inference. The other element is beginning to identify language features and literary techniques. So those similes, metaphors, idioms come in, I think, year 5, year 6. I'm trying to think. One year we did a whole wall in the classroom of idioms. I think it was year 5. So those start to come in. Can they identify these in the text? Literary techniques. Why has the author or the writer written it in a certain way? So you can see there's kind of that step up. In my head, lower primary is like learning to read. Upper primary is starting to apply those skills of learning to read and taking it that next step further. Maybe more reading with a purpose is probably the best way to put it from that upper primary. I'll hand over to Nikki again and see if she wants to add anything in.
Yeah, well, the thing about homeschooling is that some people read early, some people read late. But the one thing that is common across everybody is, first of all, everybody learns to read. And secondly, there is sort of the speaking, listening, reading and writing. If I stick my teacher hat on for a minute, I will say that there is an order. The speaking, the listening always comes first, and then the reading, and the writing lags. Okay, and it's across countries, it's across it's just the way humans work for this. And so the greatest gift you can give when you're homeschooling is you can talk a lot, because in the classroom, if I have 30 kids in front of me, they're getting one of me, they're going to get one version of everything, but and then they're going to work. Whereas when you're at school, you can talk, and you are talking, if you think about it, from the minute you get up to the minute you go to bed, and they're hearing all sorts of things, from orders like put your shoes away, as well as everything else. And you can challenge yourself if you want to, as a parent, to actually expand their vocabulary bank. So I even do this and try and encourage parents to do it even with the older children, because they are going to meet unusual words, and trying, first of all, to have a go working out what things are, chunking it so they can sort of decode unusual words. So all the skills that Dani is talking about for lower primary school that feeds upper primary school, it's actually all work that you are doing that is actually sort of university work, because when they're reading these incredibly long words that they've never met before, they have to be able to chunk it and go and be able to work things out and go, well, it begins with this, and I can have a good go at it if it was in an exam for A-level, for example. So you are actually doing all the foundational work at a really young age, and it's really important that you don't miss anything out if you can help it. Okay, Dani.
I'm going to tack on again. So always saying reading has to be taught. So if you think, I have a 2-year-old, he's a little sponge at the moment, a little parrot. Everything we say, he's copying. So you learn to speak through hearing and copying, but we don't learn to read that way. We have to be taught to read. So all of those decoding skills that Nikki just talked about, like chunking words and things like that, that's like the best way in terms of teaching reading. And one thing is, a lot of my students I work with come with a glance and guess approach. So they look at the word and they might read the start and the end of the word and guess it and keep reading. And so then they're not comprehending it properly because they've slotted the wrong word into the sentence. So I always say, if in doubt, sound it out. So if they're coming across a word, can they try and sound it out? So chip. Oh yeah, I know that word's chip. And this one here is chat. So they can either sound it out verbally, or sometimes if they've done it a little while, they can do it in their head as well. I'll add on to that when we jump into spelling, because it all kind of crosses over.
And I really want to just jump in there and just go, and clear speech really helps parents.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll shut up.
So spelling, and it does, I just said it, so it all crosses over. So the spelling skills cross into the reading skills, because if they're learning to sound out words to spell them, they can then apply those skills to sounding out words when they're reading them. So in terms of expectations for spelling, in the lower primary, so they should know all of their short and long vowel sounds. So all vowels have 2 sounds. So A, E, I, O, U are the long sounds, and then O, A are our short sounds. And then also knowing that Y can act as a vowel as well with I and E. They should know all of their consonant sounds, and knowing those correctly. The common confusion is G, which is G as in go, not J, the J sound. And then some of the students get the K for C and say the S sound as well. So those are ones to look out for. Then once they've got that in place, we're looking at digraphs and blends. And I've put those on the right-hand side. So digraphs are two letters that come together and make a new sound. So S and H come together and make sh as in sheep, or ch as chip. TH is our f and v, so this, or math. NG is I always say it's like an engine revving. And then we've got our wh and qu. So those are our digraphs. And then blends are two consonants that kind of almost slide together a little bit. And they're normally at the start, like the first two letters before the first vowel in the word. We're starting to look at morphology in those lower primary levels, but more of those simple ones. So I've put here morphology as prefixes and suffixes. So things like putting un on in the front of a word and how that changes the meaning of the word. Putting ing on the end and knowing that that means what's currently happening, they're currently doing it, or ed is past tense. So all of those, starting to add those into the spelling. So an easy way to do that is if they've got a word, can we add it? So once we've got this word sorted, can we add a prefix or suffix on the end and take it that one step further? They should know rules like doubling the consonant. So if we're adding a vowel suffix, and do we need to double the consonant before? And they should know some of those irregular words. We sometimes call those heart words because the only way to know how to spell them is to learn them off by heart. So the has got the E making the A sound. We can't sound that out to spell it. So we just have to know it off by heart. Friend has the silent I. We can't sound it out to spell it. We just have to know it off by heart. And then again, those high frequency words they're reading, we want to be able to spell those as well. So you can kind of see how that all crosses over. If they're sounding things out to spell them, that can also come into the reading in terms of when we're reading it, we're sounding it out. We can look, if we know some prefixes and suffixes, we could take those off the words when we're reading them and then add them back on. Or we could look at that and it helps us understand the sentence a little bit more because we know that ED means it's already happened, for example. I'll pause again before jumping to upper primary and see if Nikki wants to add anything there.
Yeah, I will say that some of the parents might be freaking out at like things like digraphs and morphology and things. You do not need to know that terminology, okay? You don't need to know it. We just for the people that like that sort of thing. But you can see how this, if you actually explicitly teach it, it actually helps children spell. Okay, the fact that because you're giving them something to hang their hat on, the fact that they know that ing will go ing, and if they want an ing sound, it suddenly becomes they know exactly how to spell it. And there are little tricks like that which are going to pay off later, particularly with the prefixes and suffixes, because they're going to meet throughout their life lots of vocabulary, and if they know prefixes and suffixes and it's important, they can have a really good go at understanding it. Anything else I wanted to say about that? There was a question, Krystel, can you pop it up? Said Krystel's something. There we go. Dani, do you want to take that one while we're here?
If they can memorize the rules, they can access higher level terminology or vocabulary later on. So there are students who are really good at memorizing words, and it becomes very clear when they start to reach that higher level vocabulary that they actually don't know how to access it because they've got this huge bank of memorized words, but they don't know how to break down an unknown word. We sometimes look at this I use made up words. So if I made up a word, can the kid work out what the made up word is? So that's an interesting way to see whether they've just memorized a whole lot of words instead.
And I like to think of it as throw lots of things out there and see what works for them, because every child is different. Some children are really good. It's almost like they've got the spelling gene. Some, it seems really unfair. Some children really struggle and they work really, really hard, like my elder daughter. And it took a lot of things. And we had to use a lot of morphology and things like that. And suddenly then she went, okay, I can do that. And her spelling now is fabulous and she's 20. But with my younger daughter, we never went through any of that. She just sort of instinctively knew. And I don't know what child you have, but it's a really good idea to try lots of things and then also get them to analyze it if they're old enough and go, what works for you? Okay. Spelling is unfortunately important. Just sticking my Cambridge hat on, the only time it really matters is paper 2 for English, IGCSE and A level. But it is one of those things that as a teacher, when you look at a piece of work and there's lots of misspellings, you can't help but sort of go, oh, and it could be the best thing ever, but it's actually quite hard. And it's a really horrible thing to say, but it's quite hard to get past the spelling. So you actually have to check yourself as a teacher and go, right, it's going to take me longer to read it, but it might be amazing. And it's not fair because the minute, of course, they go onto computers and have spell check, it's all done for them. But we just have to get them used to jumping through these hoops as they take exams, whatever, you know, or whatever they decide to do. It's easier if they can realise that spelling is a key part of English and literacy, and just keep at it. Okay. And I feel terribly sorry for you as well if you have a poor speller. Right, Dani.
I was just going to say part of that as well as in terms of marking, they have to be able to understand what they're trying to spell as well. So that comes into it. I was going to add on, we were talking before we jumped on. So my stepdaughter she's undiagnosed dyslexic. She's definitely dyslexic. She got told by her school teacher that she can't achieve any higher in her essays unless she sorts her spelling out, but there was no teaching. So I've done some work with her in terms of these rules, and she's mind blown. Like she's actually mind blown by vowel sounds and how much difference it's made just by learning the rules. So it does help. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to keep clicking through. I won't spend too long here, but this upper primary. So it's more looking at now, like we're looking at similar sounds. So we've got k, k, and k. So when do we use a C, when do we use a K, and when do we use CK? Vowel teams, and don't freak out with the diphthongs. I'm panicking at the diphthongs word, but they're basically two vowels together generally. Sometimes we've got OW and things like that, but vowel teams, two vowels together. Diphthongs are kind of like oi when it slides together. The morphology, so we're starting to look at those higher level prefixes and suffixes. Homophones and homonyms, so allowed and allowed is a homophone, or there, and there. Or homonyms like wave is gesture, but wave can also be see. I have seen questions like that come up in the year 5 and 6 progression papers. And then irregular words, so we want to build that bank of irregular words. And then we're starting to look at etymology. So that is kind of root words, where does it come from? What's the origin of the word? So is it Latin origin or Greek origin? And I have seen questions around that in a year 6 paper before as well.
And I will say etymology is fun. Okay, kids actually, the kids are good. Etymology is great fun. You've probably never done it before, but actually you will get very into it if you give it a go. Right.
Yeah, I have all these posters on the side of my wall. You can't see them here, but like fon is Greek, and then all the different words that use fon. And so my students love that when they get to that level. We were using it today because we had ecology as a word we were trying to decode. So then we went down a path talking about that. So they love it. All right. Writing. So writing, and I think Nikki mentioned it before, is often the last thing to come in. So I often talk to my students and some of my parents as well about the cognitive load of writing. So in order to write, we needed to be able to get our ideas together and organize those. We need to know about spelling. We need to be able to form our letters correctly, correct pencil grip so we're not getting tired hands while we're writing. We need to know our punctuation. We need to do paragraphing, and it's just this load. And sometimes if one of those things slips out, we just can't get anything on the paper. It's just, I find it's that last thing, everything kind of comes together. So lower primary, I've just put, so we're writing for a purpose. So there's some kind of purpose to their story. Maybe it's to recount what they did in the weekend. Okay, that's the purpose. They have to have some awareness of the audience. So they're starting to know, actually, I write because somebody's going to read this, or I'm writing, there's a reason I'm writing. Varied sentence starters. So we don't want the and then, and then, and then, and then, and then. We want to look at different starters. And they should be, by the end of year 3, using some basic paragraphing. It said multi-clause sentences. It does say that in the year 3 curriculum. So they're starting to kind of more than just that simple sentence. They're starting to add maybe an additional part to the sentence, or maybe like a compound sentences. So such and such and such, and blah, 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 blah. Generally, the tense is consistent. So they might still head off between that past and present a little bit, but generally. And they should be using end of sentence punctuation. So full stops, exclamation marks, question marks, apostrophe for omission. So for it is and cannot, so can't. And they're starting to use speech marks. When we cross into upper primary, again, I think it's that purpose. I think I mentioned that in the reading. They're writing for a purpose. Okay. And so they've got clearly established features. So they know what that purpose is, and they're carefully using specific features that fit that kind of purpose for the writing. Actually, it comes further down there. So it's consistency between that reader-writer relationship. So they're not just putting things into their story because they're purposely putting stuff in there to keep the reader engaged in their piece of writing. Again, that drops down into that specialized and carefully selected vocabulary. So for a non-fiction piece of writing, they're using this specialized terminology. And then when they're in their fiction writing, they're carefully selecting the words they use, again, to keep the reader engaged. The biggest thing in upper primary is they have to be using paragraphs. So I used to mark some year 5 and 6 work, and that if they didn't have their paragraphs, they just dropped right down in terms of their mark they achieved. So yeah, paragraphs have to be used, and they should be linking the beginning to the introduction to the end, to their conclusions. That needs to start to link. They need to be using simple, compound, and complex sentences, and their tense should be consistent. I put higher level punctuation. So in year 6, things like ellipses start to come in, brackets. So they're starting to include that punctuation. I've got a few exemplars because it's a trick I used to teach my students, but it's actually really helpful. And I thought as a parent, it would be really helpful as well, in terms of what the writing expectation is at each year level. So this is a year 3 text from an old progression paper. So what we used to tell the students when they went into their exams is, this is an example of kind of what you should be writing. So the text they provide you to read is an example of what your writing should look like. So how many paragraphs are there? Okay, you should have about this many paragraphs. What's the punctuation that's being used? And you're trying to look at it. And so we've got here, we've got a question mark and we've got an exclamation mark. So in my piece of writing, I want to make sure I'm trying to use a question mark and an exclamation mark. We've got little things coming in. Where are we? It's probably better looking at the year 6 one. But, comma, during the hot day. So things like that. I will jump into the older one because it's a bit better. So this is from a year 6 progression paper. So again, we would tell the students, because they would have read this text and answered questions on it in terms of comprehension, language features and things like that. And then generally the written element of it is to maybe carry on the story or write your own version of a report or something. So again, we would look at this and go, okay, how many paragraphs? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I should be writing about 4 paragraphs. What punctuation is in here? How have they structured it? So yesterday I visited the part, and then we've got first of all in there. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add in, Nikki. I think you're big on writing.
I am.
Yes.
So ellipses and things like that. Do not think your child has to have things like that by age 11. It would be wonderful if they did, okay? But some of the things Dani's talking about, you've got to remember, these are the things that ideally all children will have by age 11, okay? There are some things like, I would say, I would love, if a child is 11, them to be able to write consistently, for me to be able to, first of all, be able to read it, okay? Because there's no point in actually writing something that I then can't read. And to make it easier on the reader, that's why we paragraph things. So part of the whole thing about punctuation is the audience, which is what Dani was talking about. There is no point, and it's all done for communication. So there's no point in writing something if somebody at the end of it can't actually follow the thought. So we paragraph to make it easier for the reader. There is a choice of punctuation. We actually talk about punctuation choices later on, because you do not have to use a full stop, but the full stop gives a clue to the reader. So whenever you put things in terms of punctuation and what your child is doing, there is a reason behind it. And if you can actually explain to your child the reason behind why we do it, if they are somebody who litters their story with capital letters and odd punctuation, it's because we want to be able to understand it. Okay, and it's as simple as that. And one trick that I've found that works really well is to go and get them to read it out loud. Because when they're actually reading, they realize the cues that the punctuation is giving them. Okay, in that there's a paragraph there and you go, ah, and then you can start again. But if that isn't there and you're just reading, or you have a child that isn't punctuating, and you go, okay, but you're only allowed to breathe where the punctuation is, they very quickly learn to punctuate. So that's something. So age 11, I would go, as a teacher, full stops, capital letters, commas, paragraphs, please, even though they might not quite be right. But we have to be able to read it. And if I'm reading a story, I don't want, I woke up and this and this and this. I would much rather have something that is shorter, okay? And this can often scare parents. I would rather have 5 good or 4 good sentences from an age 11 that actually told me something than something with very simplistic language that just goes on and on and on, that doesn't tell me anything, okay? It's all about what's in that child's head, which goes back to what Dani said, because if you don't put anything in, you don't get anything out. If they haven't, if they're talking about walking in the rain, if they've never walked in the rain, you're not going to get anything out. If they've never been in a forest and seen, the beautiful red toadstool things and heard the rain dripping off, they can't write about it. So the more you can shove in and experiences, remember, you're an adult, so you actually have to look at the experiences through a child's eyes. So you might be walking past, I don't know, a busker and go, oh, it's them. But to them, that might be a wondrous thing, okay? Or a snail on the path, maybe a very wondrous thing. So you have to sort of bring out your childish inquisitiveness and go, oh, look at that, and then give them the vocabulary around it verbally before you get it on the page. Dani.
Thank you. I was going to add to that as well, like even taking them somewhere to write, so somewhere different. And so what can you see, paint that picture, so you're trying to, when we read it, we can almost imagine that we're back there. And that sometimes gets rid of the and then and focusing on like, what color is the sky? Blue. What shade of blue is it? Can we, and trying to just add those layers into it. Yeah, and again, that background, I always talked about, if they haven't been out blowing bubbles, they can't write about bubbles. So it's really, really important. The other thing I was going to add in is handwriting. And I know we have had a cursive debate before. So lower primary, like pencil grip is so important. In my job, I'm correcting pencil grip daily, and it might not be so important at this stage, but when they're getting older and they're writing and writing, I had terrible pencil grip. I'm a left-handed. I came out of exams with blisters on my fingers. So, and I think I learned in January this year when I was doing my training how to hold a pencil properly. So pencil grip is important, and I teach it as lock it and load it. So grabbing it with the 2 fingers, loading it and resting it on your finger. Correct formation of lower and uppercase. And then if you want to do some cursive in that age, just for fun, I know in the UK, I was talking to a teacher from over there, and they teach the littlies cursive for their digraphs and blends. So because the sounds go together, so they teach them to link them straight away, so they know that those sounds go together. And if you want to throw in learning sounds, you can do that with handwriting at the same time. So as they're forming the letter, what sound does it make? Upper primary is generally when I begin to introduce cursive writing in the classroom. And we're just playing around with it, really, like learning, because it takes time. So it's slow to start with, but once we've got it, we can write a lot faster. So we're starting to experiment with it, and I'm starting to introduce a pen. I like pencil in those lower levels because it's that kind of tactile, like you can feel the pencil on the paper a little bit more. It makes it a bit easier. Or if you're a lefty like me, I smudge my pen. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and Nikki might add to that too, because I do come from a classroom background.
I will just add, remember your child may have sensitivities, so it might not make any difference to you what sort of paper they get or whether they're writing on the right or the left hand side of the page, but it probably might do to your child. And the same with a pen, that you can have sort of skiddy pens and pens that smell bad. So it's always worth asking if they have any things like that, because I once asked a class of 30 and 8 of them had problems with something, whether it was the pen or the pencil, or they didn't like the feel of something, or a particular sort, they preferred to write on one side, okay, rather than the other. And at school, you can't actually do anything about that because you're part of a classroom, but we can do that as homeschoolers. So you can actually make things like that really work, okay? And I know it costs more money, if it's a 25-cent book or whatever, if you're only going to use half of it, but it can make such a difference, okay? And it can make a difference to handwriting, and if they're proud of their handwriting, then they actually start to get and want to get other things right, like their spelling, and it's sort of they all feed each other, all these things that we're talking about. Dani?
Yeah, I have a homeschool student I work with, and when she came to me at the start of the year, there were capital letters all throughout her handwriting. It was all over the sheet. And we just did a little, I use the sky, grass, and the dirt system in terms of how we make our letters sit on the page. And she is so proud of her handwriting now. And like you just said, the spellings come in. She's writing stories for fun. Like she's writing on people's birthday cards. So I think handwriting seems like such a small thing, but it is, yeah, beneficial. It's important. I'm going to jump into maths, and I'm aware the slides look a bit scary, but we're just going to talk through them. So moving into maths, lower primary, again, it's foundations. I support a lot of students who maybe they get to that year 4 level or even intermediate and they can't access the maths, and generally it all comes back to that same point where they're missing some foundations, and without that foundation they can't access that next level of maths. So those foundations are the ability to count on and count back, recognize, read, and write numbers. So they need to be able to recognize it, read it, and write it in like words and digit form. Times tables. So I've put up to 10. I would maybe even trim that back a little bit. I'm like 8s and 9s and things, maybe not so much at this level, but definitely those 1s, 2s, 5s, 10s. I just taught some little year 2 Cambridge students their 11 times tables, and literally just by saying you double that number, and they were mind blown. So they're stoked. They've learned their 11s. But yeah, times tables are really, really important, especially as we start to get higher up. They need that foundation. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and
can I just jump in there?
Yes.
There is a really good order to learning your times tables.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as you would think.
Not,
okay.
Yeah.
You want to talk about it, Dani?
No, you go.
Okay.
It might be different to mine.
Because naturally your children meet things. They meet things in pairs because they meet socks and shoes and things. So you're going to naturally bring up the 2 times table, hopefully when they're quite little. And the same with 10s, because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes. So that's an early one as well. And then we have things in 5s as well. So 2s, 5s, and 10s come first. Okay. And then you might want to do the 3s and 4s. Okay, because they're really handy. And then the other ones are quite spiky and weird. The 11s is quite a fun one to do early because it's dead easy. Okay, as Dani was saying. And then, things like 7s, 8, 9s can be a bit weird and quite tricky. They do take practice. Okay, but definitely 2s, 5s, and 10s first. Agreed?
Yeah, agreed. I don't know if I should talk about Temu, but I actually just bought some multiplication fidgets from Temu, and the kids think they're incredible. And they spin them around and it lands on one and they have to do it, and then they flip it because the division's on the back, so the answer's on the back. So if you've got fidgety kids, and they're all obsessed with these times table fidgets. Yeah, so times tables, and then if we're jumping in, adding and subtracting whole numbers up to 3 digits, I like to teach, and this is the same for multiplication division, the old-fashioned way, in terms of writing it in column method, which I know can be a little bit frowned upon in the schooling system. But if you've got a child who struggles with maths, it's easy for them. So I am a little bit old-fashioned there. I actually meant to say earlier on, when they're younger, maths can be taught in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be sitting with a workbook. So counting shoes, how many shoes are on the shoe rack, or even out doing the grocery shopping and things like that. So math is really easy to incorporate into everyday life.
Yeah, come on, you probably know huge amount of ways that we do maths, okay? And most of it is not necessarily with the book. And also, because I'm always talking about practical maths and going, give them experience, because if we go right back to what we talked about and going, we need to keep that love of learning. If they're sitting down all the time and going, oh, it's maths time, it's way different from counting something or measuring something or tessellation, and doing lots of craft things where they are using maths and using their measuring and using all these things and skills. And there is a huge amount of art and things. I need to write about that. There's a huge amount of all of these things that they can do, which does all this foundational work for you, but it's disguised. They will never know. Carry on, Dani.
It reminded me, so I had one of my schools in Auckland, I had a group of year 8 students who were unlikely to meet national standards. It was national standards at the time. So you can imagine how switched off to maths they were in this group of kids. And so I had to just get incredibly creative. And so we were using Skittles and sorting out the colors in the Skittle packets. I had them learning geometry through dance. It was a girls' school. So we did a whole dance lesson, and that's how they understood geometry. Ratios, we were mixing paint and doing painting. And so there is a way to teach it without a textbook for maths. But again, you still want to make sure those foundations are in place so that they can build upon that later on. But you can get creative.
Yeah, I will just jump in there as well and say, age 11, remember, I would get the kids from little school that come to my, the school that I taught at, and going, if they could add, subtract, and have all of those things in place, and they had an understanding of the things that Dani is talking about here. Okay, it didn't have to be perfect, but they'd met it. They'd had they'd got a good feel for it. We knew they were going to be good math students. Okay, so it didn't mean that they, had done enormous amounts of this stuff, but they'd met, especially the everyday maths that like telling the time and all these things, and that they understood how it worked. And okay, they might be sometimes a little bit slower than we would like, but we knew with practice they would get it. Okay, sorry, Dani.
No, that's fine. And yeah, again, like fractions, I think every kid I work with says they hate fractions, but it's because they don't understand them. So again, like fractions is an easy one to make really practical: pizza, cake, baking, all of that. And that's a really easy way to get that concept of a fraction in those early years. And I use lots of materials for fractions too. So I've got it's again year 2 Cambridge student. And so we're using lots and lots of counters and things to work out our fractions at the moment, because we're trying to do fractions of a whole, so halves and quarters and thirds. Nikki mentioned time, so reading and recording time in digital and analog, and then like reading timetables. So that to me could be a really fun adventure in terms of sitting down and looking at timetables, planning a trip somewhere on the bus or a train or wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And manipulatives do not have to cost the earth. I bought a pack of plastic straws. This is how old my kids are, when you could buy plastic straws, and I chopped them up. Everything went into quarters, I think, and then that was called what we called a 1, and we had elastic bands, and we'd do a bundle for 10, and then we'd bundle those together to make 100, and then I had a little container, and it was all snipped up into tenths and things like that, and it cost me all of about $4, and we used that, and the whole idea that they could physically move these about and then unbundle them, they understood column maths when they were 6, because of these stupid plastic straws and, you know, things. It cost next to nothing. And so the thing about some expensive systems that some people use is sometimes a child is like looking at it and go, well, that one's pink and that one's red and that one's green. Does it make a difference? Because remember, as a child, they don't quite understand which bits are important. So you have to tell them, okay? Because otherwise they can get completely the wrong end of a stick.
I keep looking at this clock, so I'm going to keep going. Geometry, I'm going to jump through all of this and just kind of look at that upper primary, those foundations again. So again, it's still that counting on and back, but now we're counting in fractions, decimals, negative numbers as well. Times tables, we've added in, I just realized 7s still aren't in there. 7s, 11s, and 12s. I'm pretty sure 7 should be in from now. We're adding and subtracting, but we're also looking at negative numbers. So again, you could look at temperature. I love using temperature to teach negative numbers. We're starting to multiply by 2-digit numbers. Again, I like that written method. Or dividing. I talk about the bus stop. So there's this many people waiting at the bus stop and this many buses turn up. How many? So as the people are getting onto the buses. Order of operations, squares, cubes, multiples, factors, divisibility. Those are scary words again. But I do know it's important because I've worked with some Cambridge students in year 7, 8, and 9, and it builds upon that. So they didn't have that foundation in place. So they were really struggling, particularly with the common multiples, factors, and divisibility. I don't know if you can talk to that, Nikki.
Yeah, well, this is where the New Zealand system is different. And again, people who are doing things like Matthews say, it works differently. So that's why I'm always saying to people, make sure you know what you're going to do. And that's what we were talking yesterday and going, if you keep flitting around curriculum, you're going to have holes. So it's worth looking. And this is what's so hard. It's you might find a book you absolutely love at year 4 and then sort of change after year 5, but then they get holes in their learning. So this is something as a parent you need to watch and manage very carefully, because it's easier to do things as you go through where they almost naturally meet them in real life, which is what the Cambridge bit is based on. They need to be able to use timetables and do this sort of work because they're doing cooking and doing everything else, as opposed to becoming an expert in fractions for however many years and then an expert in decimals and not touching fractions again. So you just need to watch, and that's part of the job as a homeschool parent, is actually watching the whole thing and making sure that you either plug holes in the system that you're using or you swap to something where they're getting lots of everything, because it's always hard. And I know we're talking a lot about Cambridge tonight. If somebody comes to me at the age of 15 and asks for maths, and then we find out that they've got whole areas missing, instead of just being able to concentrate on improving those skills. Yeah, do not worry too much about things like order of operations. You also need to be aware that if you use an American curriculum, they actually have a completely different meaning for trapezium. So they will be taught one thing as a trapezium that is something different in Cambridge. And they will be taught in Cambridge, they'll be taught BODMAS, but you will hear other people call it BEDMAS and PEMDAS, and they all have different names. And as an adult, you'll look at it and go, that's fine. As a child, it is so confusing. Okay, so it's easier to sort of stick with the same name. So even if you swap books and they call it something else, you will have to constantly remind your child, well, this is what a trapezium is. This is what we're talking about. That's why Dani's put it as order of operations there, because there are so many different names. Okay, and it matters. All this small stuff that you go, oh, it doesn't matter. There are lots of little niggly things that kids need to know, that you're not going to move the goalposts on them. Okay, so just watch out for things like that in the books you use. Carry on, Dani, we're running out of time.
I know, I'm going to jump into science really fast. This is just all... Oh, actually, I should touch on that algebra. It's only a really introduction in that primary. So knowing that kind of letters can represent numbers, and then they're starting to find rules and patterns. So it doesn't go too deep, but there is that little touch on those foundations of algebra, mostly around positions and rules and patterns and things like that. Okay, science is not my area of expertise, but in terms of primary, like, you can have so much fun with science. I remember science as a kid, and I mean, I've done science in IB, PYP, and we built brains with Play-Doh, or we got old computers and pulled them all apart and looked at circuits and things. Like, we just had so much fun. But I think it's little things that you could plan out, a little mini experiment. They can formulate questions, they can make predictions. So they're learning that kind of science terminology. You can talk about validity and reliability. I guess we're going back to that vocab, so they're starting to learn all that vocabulary. There are kind of those areas of science which I've put on the next slide. Nikki, you might be able to say how important that is at kind of in terms of homeschooling and things, but this is kind of what's covered in Cambridge schooling.
Yeah, absolutely. But as homeschoolers, you're probably covering a lot of this sort of stuff anyway, because it's all the fun stuff, and the kids absolutely love fun stuff. And how many times did we, put baking soda and vinegar together? But every time you do it, you can take it a little bit further, and you can Google stuff, and you can start using the right vocabulary and start talking about, well, what happens in the lab, and how we can do stuff at home, and the safety things, because all of that comes in as well. But mainly it's about getting them excited about science, because it's surrounding us all the time. And if you Google, I mean, you know this stuff, kitchen chemistry or physics at Rainbow's End, or physics in the playground. There are lots and lots of experiments to do. Do not get hung up on writing them, okay? You can take a photograph and go, this is what we did. If you've got a child that is not a great writer, maybe they have the photograph and they write one sentence, but it's a really good sentence and you can read it. And it's got capital letter and full stop, okay? Because gradually it will increase, okay? Gradually it will improve, and you have to have the faith that you are doing all the right things and you will get there, in the right place. So absolutely, yes, I'm all for science in the, up to the age of 11. But don't expect too much, okay? Let them have fun with it. Use what's to hand, okay? You don't necessarily need a book. You can buy books. You can get books from the library. You know all of this. But have a look what's on, whether you're doing, whether you're winding up New Zealand curriculum or what it is, have a look at the next things that are coming along and see if you can give them some of the vocabulary and the ideas and the concepts behind it before they actually need it. Because then when they meet it, they go, oh, I remember doing about that. Okay, but mainly it's about having fun and trying to give them the right sort of vocabulary and language, to have fun with it. Carry on, Dani. We are almost
full circle, because we've got these experiences, right? We're talking about all the background knowledge and the experiences and the vocab. So doing all of this stuff is building those experiences and that knowledge and that vocab. Writing, they don't have to write a scientific experiment out, but taking a photo and then writing about what they did or what they liked about it, or I don't know, the colors that came out of it. So you can use it as a little prompt for a little piece of writing.
Yeah. Hey, we are going to have to take, Dani, do you mind if we take some questions? Because we're going to have to finish on time, because they have to start on time.
Can I do one thing?
Yeah.
I didn't mention UK spelling. Yeah, UK spelling, not US spelling.
Well, it's difficult because they don't mind whether you do UK or US now for Cambridge, but you have to do one or the other, not in the middle. Yes, you cannot do the middle. So if you're using US stuff, be aware they're going to wind up, if they do Cambridge, with US. I don't know how it works for New Zealand, but you just need to sort of know where it is you're going, because it does matter. Okay, it's going to matter when they're 16 or 17 or 18 and they're taking exams. You don't want them to really have a mixture of it all. Okay, Krystel, you can jump in with some questions, which hopefully are for Dani.
Oh, that's a tricky. I always say my thing is it steps up from year 4. So, and I say year 4 because that's when their confidence can start to get knocked. So when the difficulty steps up and then the confidence starts to go, that's when I get concerned, because we don't want someone out there feeling not confident in their abilities, because then they start to not take any more and they start to slip further and further behind. So I would say, I mean, I work with students who are very, very, very behind, but we've done a lot of work with them and their confidence is still there. So we're making sure they're happy in their learning and they're confident. So they are still making those baby steps, which are their steps. But I would say confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say as well, they start to notice what other people of their age can do, and that really can knock confidence as well. And again, we don't want their confidence being knocked. My daughter is 12 and absolutely dislikes reading. Yeah, I had one of those. She finds it really hard on her eyes, and it takes a lot of effort just to read half a page before she gives up. Dani, what's your field of expertise?
It is. I have a stepdaughter, she's 14 now as well, and yeah, dislikes reading. Hers is dyslexia. When I say hard on her eyes, my question is it like a visual, or is it that it's the cognitive load of reading? So is she really struggling to read the words on the page, and therefore it's exhausting for her? And then there might be something else going on in terms of two things. I don't like to jump to dyslexia, and I'm not qualified to diagnose that myself. But again, are those rules taught so she knows how to access words that she doesn't know? Or two, is it something else going on where she does have a reading challenge? Yes, if you want to go down the assessment path, the Learning Matters website has some really good, I don't know where you're based, has some good recommendations. There's a lady in Cambridge. ProEd in Auckland are amazing too. Just be careful where you go, because there are some copy-paste people.
Okay, maybe connect, I don't know if you know, on the Cambridge site, connect with Dani on the Cambridge site, and maybe you can DM her and she can just
My contact details are on the next slide as well.
Oh, and the study nook, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so send me an email and I'm happy to chat.
I jumped in at spelling, so not sure if this has been mentioned. What are the recommendations for if our kids don't have these abilities by 11? Dani, this is you again.
Work out where they're at and start building from there. Everyone progresses differently. And I've started with students who are older, and it's amazing how quickly they pick it up. So just work out kind of where they're at. Do they know all their letter sounds? Yes. Next stage, can we look at some digraphs? Next stage, can we look at some of those rules, like we use CK after a short vowel, anything like that. So just make sure the foundations are in place, vowel sounds, consonants, and then progress from there.
Yeah, I will just add as well, address it. It will not get better. Okay, if you don't address it, it will not get better. But 5 minutes a day does wonders every single day, and they will think it's nothing. Okay, but you go 5 minutes every single day. Krystel, are you back? Was that our last one?
Yep. That was. So Dani, you pop your contact details up so everyone knows where to contact you.
Maybe take a photo of this.
Just want to say thank you. That was amazing. A lot of that I knew because I have studied that myself. But yeah, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much to the both of you. So thank you everybody for sticking around. I hope you learned a whole lot in that, and I hope you don't stress about it all either. So coming up, we're going to have a cup of tea break, and we are coming next up with Erin Parkinson again, and yours truly, and we are going to talk about how we keep things broad for our preteens and teenagers. So please go get yourself a cup of tea, and we will be back in about 15 minutes or so. So thank you, Dani. Thank you, Nikki. Absolutely fantastic. And hopefully we'll see you both on Friday at 8 o'clock with the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. everyone has their cup of tea. I know I certainly got mine. Erin, do you have yours tonight? You a cup of tea drinker?
Got some water.
So everybody, this is Erin. We met her last night. I'm Krystel from Engaging Minds, Erin from Parkinson Online, and tonight Erin is going to be talking all about keeping things broad for our teenagers. Not bored, broad. The R is important. The order of those letters is so important, aren't they? So, Erin, I will leave it all up to you tonight and pop in when I am required.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Let me just put my notes on the stage. There we go. Hi. So, what should or could my child be learning? My preteen or teenager, otherwise known as keeping things broad. Okay. I'm Erin. I've got 6 children, and I homeschooled for 14, 15 years. It all depends on when you say you start, right? You know, if we're going from age 5, then 14 years. My children, as they reached teenage years, went off to high school, with the exception of one that didn't start till year 11 and the youngest that started in year 6. You know, life, everything like that. But when COVID hit in 2020 and we were all in lockdown, I started teaching online classes because I had been teaching in our little homeschool group, just, you know, mums getting together and taking different ideas and classes. And so I carried that on online. And then I had school kids joining in, friends, you know, children of friends, and then more homeschoolers, and it grew into a business. And it's just keeps growing, which is amazing. It's really, really amazing. So I teach all different kinds of classes. I like teaching history and social studies the most, and my debate classes, a little bit of English, not writing, but all sorts. I end up doing science, and I end up doing primary school options. Mostly I like to teach to the age group that I'm talking about tonight, though, that sort of 11 to 14, that middle school age group, before it gets really serious with exams and secondary pathways, and after they've stopped being primary school. I am a trained teacher, but I only taught for 1.5 years before having 6 children and homeschooling. So there's my details on the screen there, parkinsononlineclasses.wordpress.com. On Facebook, you can just look up Parkinson Online Classes. So, yeah, that's the basics about me. There's a picture there of Mother's Day, myself and my 6 children. So they're getting really big now. The eldest is 22. She's down at Wellington University, Victoria University, I should say. And then 20, 19, 17, about to turn 16, and a 13-year-old on the very end there. So he's off to high school next year. So there we go. That's my intro. So how do I know if my child is keeping up with their year if they were at school? What should my child be learning? How can I know if they're ahead or behind, or when should I start teaching them about this or that? Or what does my child need to know in the early high school years? How do I make sure they don't miss out on what they'd be covering at school? And what do they need to have covered before they sit exams? These are all questions that I have seen and I have answered over the years. I spent a lot of years as part of the Auckland Home Educators Committee. I admin Facebook groups. I've talked at workshops and conferences. And these questions come up all the time. And they don't just come up from newbies either. Veteran homeschoolers will suddenly have like a bit of an anxiety crisis and go, I've been homeschooling for 10 years and now with this child and this age, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So you get all sorts of different kinds of answers. A lot of people will just kind of go, just teach them at their level. That's not how homeschooling works. You can teach whatever you want. It doesn't have to be what they do at school, and they'll turn out fine. Don't worry about it. And I don't disagree with any of these, But often people need a bit more support, and they need a little bit more detail than just blindly trust that answer of that it doesn't matter, because this is our children's education and we are responsible for it. So it does matter. And as someone who loves educating and teaching and children's education, it matters. I mean, like, it matters to me if other people are not doing a great job. But what a great job is different in every family, and I strongly advocate for that. So, back to these questions. Yeah, you can be tracking along just fine, and then wham, someone asks what you're doing, or you compare yourself to somebody else. Never, ever a good idea. And you start to stress. You want to know about such and such, or simply your kids have reached this different level and you don't know what you should be doing next. So I always like to, in my teaching, in my classes and, conferences, I'll throw up cartoons because nothing's better than a cartoon or a meme. So, okay, young beings, or you guys can read it yourself. So I'm just hoping that this talk will give you some ideas and reassure you. You can't do everything. None of us learned everything that there was to know while we were at school and in our formative years. None of us have learned everything yet at whatever age you are, 30 or 40 or 50, whatever. So we can't do everything, but we can be aware of all the amazing things that we can introduce our children to. And hopefully this talk gives you some ideas of some really cool stuff that you can broaden your children's horizons with, as well as laying those foundational skills of literacy and numeracy and things like that. Okay, so in the New Zealand curriculum, there are 8 compulsory subjects in New Zealand from sort of year 1 to year 10. Okay, we've got English, we've got learning languages, maths and statistics, science, social sciences, health and PE, the arts, which kind of is dance and drama, music and visual art, and technology. And as homeschoolers, we do not have to follow this. And if anyone's told you otherwise, or you have not yet written an exemption and you get told that you need to be including every single one of these, that is wrong. You do not. However, there's nothing wrong with all of these. These are great. There's so much more we can be putting into our education, though, on top of these as well. But yeah, as homeschoolers, we're not obliged. So I've got a question I want everyone to ask themselves, though, because most of you probably did grow up in New Zealand and had the same kind of education. But what is one subject or topic or task that you had to do at school that you have never used again in adult life? Other than needing to know it to pass an exam or a test, has it got any value now? I mean, how many of us can remember sok katoa, don't remember what to do with it or how it actually works, unless you have recently been teaching it to your high school child, but you just kind of know it? Or another really key one, keep that topic in mind. What have you never used again, but you did have to learn? What's one subject that you didn't learn at school that would have been really helpful, like taxes, financial literacy? Instead, can you just recite verbatim like a robot, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell? And I mean, I don't know about anyone else. I can. And I do now, again, remember what it means because I just recently taught it in one of my classes. But I have spent the last 28 years or so knowing that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and not actually remembering what that meant. It was sort of drilled into me in high school biology, but it didn't learn about making a budget and, something really useful like that. So these are things, if you think of things that you really wish you had learned at school, put that at the top of the list of something to teach your children. I mean, why not? Okay, so looking at primary school, You set a strong foundation. You teach them to read, to write, to count. You take them places. You introduce them to people. You let them play and encourage them to discover things they didn't know they could do, like taking them to the zoo and how to ride a bike, how to climb a tree. And it's a really great time for giving knowledge, facts about the world around them. You know, this is a great time for memorization. Primary school kids are like parrots. They learn stuff really well and they parrot it back, whether it's the swear word that you accidentally said in front of them or song lyrics that are actually inappropriate for your 8-year-old to be singing. But, you know, dinosaur names and learning all of them, even though you don't really know how they actually picked those up. So it's a great time to be teaching them poetry and teaching them, you know, other things that they can memorize. This is really good for fact loading at this age. But we're not doing primary. In the senior years, 15, 16, 17, 18, those end years of high school, we're handing most of the responsibility of the education over to our teenager, or we should be. Hopefully they've got some skills. We're still responsible, and we need to be there and be encouraging and be watching and paying attention, be involved in their education. But if they're 16 and you're still choosing all of their subjects, that's a little worrying. You know, they're just about an adult, so they should be really, really involved in their education by that point and working on time management skills and all of those. And by now, by those 15, 16, 17-year-old age, they know what subjects they like and they don't like, which ones they find easy and which ones they find hard. They know what our expectations are for them and maybe the expectations they have for themselves. They might not know what they want to do with their life. In fact, at 15, very few do, but they're usually pretty aware of what they don't want to do with their life. So by 13, 14, my eldest knew she was not going into medicine. You know, I harbored all these ideas of doctor and all of that, but no, she didn't like blood. She didn't like people being injured. So medicine wasn't going to work for her at all. And my fourth child absolutely knew by 14, 15, he wanted to work outside. Worst fear ever was to be stuck indoors doing paperwork for a job, for any kind of career. And that's probably going to change, you know, working outdoors with his hands in the elements. Might get tired of that by the time he's in his 30s, but for him, he was not going to, you know, he was very determined, is very determined. He's not going off to university. He's going to work outdoors. And that's okay. I'm prepping them all regardless. So they know what they do hate. They know what they don't like. They might not know what they want to be, but that's okay. But we're also not doing the senior students. So we're left with those middle years, those kind of 11 to 14-ish. And I've said ish because it's kind of year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. Maybe it's 10 to 15, but 11 to 14-ish. The pert age. Okay, this is the age group that likes to question, that likes to be curious, that likes to explore and argue with you. Yeah, these guys, they want to know why. And I'll just go here for a second. Oh, no, wrong one. Okay, so it's just a really, really good age for this exposure, for those middle years of education. And I just particularly like this cartoon because it's the perfect age for doing all the things. You don't have to concentrate so much if they've got that foundation on you know, teaching them to read. Yeah, absolutely, you want to be still doing English. Big, big, big thing for me. And reading lots of books. But this is the age that you can be introducing all these other things, like what for most of you would have done at intermediate and early high school, where you have options all of a sudden. It's not just compulsory school subjects. It's, would you like to try out this topic? Would you like to give this a go? In some schools, it's an option. Some schools, they're just one term of each, but it was compulsory. But, you know, you have a little try at sewing and you have a little try at home economics or cooking or whatever. You try out some woodwork. It's this perfect age to be exposing them to all these different things, these subjects, these topics that they can be learning. And as students move from that primary school to intermediate and early high school age, their satisfaction with just learning the facts decreases. So they're entering that stage where they're more argumentative, they're more challenging. The stage where they start to look outside themselves and they start questioning things from other people's perspectives. And boy, do they question. Why? Who says why? But why? And that's really annoying if you're trying to teach maths 6 times over with 6 children, and for the umpteenth time, you're like, yes, you have to show you're working, but why? Because you just do. But why? No, you just do. You just have to show you're working. But it's really exciting when maybe something comes in on the news and they're like, why is there another war happening? Why are they fighting? Because that's it. For me, at least, this is the brilliant part. You get to jump in and go, oh, history and social studies and geography and politics and trade and economics and all these things. Yes, why are they fighting? That's a really good question. Let's dive into that subject. Or, science, it's a really good why time for learning science, for learning about the world, for learning about other people. It's just really annoying when it's, why do I have to show my working on maths? So pre-teens and teens they're naturally inquisitive. Their curiosity is at the peak at this age, and the curiosity about the world and questioning sort of things that they haven't questioned when they were younger, outside of themselves, being able to think about other people and maybe their motivations or what's different between them and other people. So it's the age where we can broaden their horizons. And I've kind of narrowed it down to the 3 main things that I think are important at this age. Broadening horizons, developing critical thinking, and building life skills. And the reason, obviously these things carry on into the senior high school, but if you've got kids that are following a particular secondary pathway, a qualification to get into, say, tertiary, they get to follow on with their education. They get to, deep dive into just a few subjects at that point. You're narrowing down what they're doing, or they're narrowing down, focusing on sort of 4 or 5 main subjects in order to sit exams, to tick boxes. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing, but that is what they're doing. They're having to learn this particular thing to be able to pass this, to be able to do what they want to do. Whereas at this stage, you can be prepping them for that, prepping them for life, and just introducing them to so many amazing things in the world and education. So broadening their horizons, developing that critical thinking that they need and those life skills. If they're not going to do those secondary pathways, like a particular qualification, then this gets to carry on through 15, 16, 17 until they've left home and, they're continuing to do it. I mean, I am still building some really crucial life skills now, cooking being one of them. So we're going to talk about broadening horizons. I just kind of named as many things as I could think of until I ran out of room on the slide. I could have put 100 more things up on the screen, but you've done literacy, you've done numeracy, and you will continue to do it. You've introduced them to the zoo, or you've read books, you've tried different things at primary school. But 11 to 14, what are they interested in that you can introduce them, that you can let them deep dive into? Or what haven't they been exposed to that you kind of go, hey, should we go and learn about astronomy? We're going to go to Stardome in Auckland. We're going to go find someone with a telescope and look through it. And if they get really, really into it, that's awesome. And if you're just giving them a taster of all the things that you can possibly find to give them a taster of in the world, which sounds really, really big and a little bit too daunting. So just pick out a few. Just pick one per term or one every month or something. And what you can manage with your family. So, if you haven't done much social studies or science before now, this is your chance. This is the age where distance and size starts to make a lot more sense. Like, how far away is this country from our country? Or how long ago was 100 years or 1,000 years? Because, you discover that actually at 9 and 10, they have no concept of that. They ask if you were around when the TV was invented, or were you alive when dinosaurs were on the earth? And you realize they have no concept of how young 44 is or whatever. So at this age, 11 to 14, they've got a much better idea of that. And they begin to understand that people can think differently and eat differently and believe different things, and all of these things. They're questioning things, politics, they're questioning science. They're beginning to learn about how the world in the adult world actually works. And they don't know it, they don't understand it, but they're actually at the point where they can start to think outside of themselves like that. So, they're suddenly really interested in electronics or architecture. Go for it. Let them deep dive into those sorts of subjects. Developing critical thinking. This is the age where instead of giving them the information, it's time for them to start evaluating sources themselves for reliability and bias. Is it reliable that I get my information from this Instagram post? Is the first thing that I Google going to be correct? Can I trust ChatGPT's answer every single time? What's an opposing viewpoint on this issue? What is a logical fallacy? If you've got the opportunity to get a book, a video, to do a class on fallacies and learning about fallacies and arguments, this is a great time to do it. This is the time for asking open-ended, thought-provoking questions, not just what is this, but why did this happen? How did this happen? What caused this event, and what are the consequences of what's going on? They can be learning to interpret data and draw conclusions from it, and making evidence-based decisions and starting to formulate their own personal perspectives. So getting into debating and discussion is really good. In my classes, I have a junior debate class, so they start off with doing things like, does pineapple belong on pizza? They can't answer with just yes or no. They have to create a speech. They have to argue their position. And it's fascinating, the arguments that they can come up with, because of course it does. Of course, pineapple is the best thing to put on a pizza. But, we move into my senior debate class, what is free will? And current debate topics. What are they debating tomorrow? I think we're doing the current debate topic of the treaty bill. So, that's a much, much older class. So all these critical thinking, personal perspectives, looking at different perspectives and being able to talk about them, think how other people think, and respect how other people think, and then be able to argue for it. And then this is a really good time for these new skills and life skills, because 11 to 14-year-olds, man, we homeschool. That means they're at home a lot. And you, parents, are busy. And if you're like me and don't particularly like cooking, you've got children. It's a skill that they need to learn. I did not learn this very well as a teenager, nor did I like it. So my kids are all excellent cooks, and the older ones are better than I am, despite years now of practice of feeding a family, because I made them cook. Not in a do this or you're in trouble. It was a lot more, well, I'm not cooking dinner, so if you make some, then you get a hot dinner. Otherwise, you guys can just have cereal. Not all the time, not terrible person like that. But they learned to cook really, really well because I just let them practice and let them play in the kitchen and let them create foods and learn how to cook. And it's a really good life skill, like so important. I would say much more important than knowing SOHCAHTOA or mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, is knowing how to actually feed your family for a week. But other life skills, this is the time for trying out new sports or learning to play an instrument if they haven't done that before. Household maintenance. Can they run the washing machine? Can they change the light bulb? mechanics, maybe not at 11. Yes, maybe at 11 in some families, but certainly 14, 15, you're getting into learning your license age at 16. So can they start to take care of the car, put petrol in it, things like that? Catching public transport, which, if you live in Auckland, is much more of a big deal. Do they actually have the confidence to catch a bus, and do they know how to do that and to read the instructions of what to do? Making appointments by phone and email. This is a really biggie for some kids, confidence levels and all of that. But it's so important. And it's, I think, less daunting if they're 11 to 14 than if you haven't gotten them to do it and then suddenly they have to do it for the first time at 16, 17. If it's just a natural sort of thing that they've been doing for years, it's not a problem when they leave home and they've actually got to make their own doctor's appointments. Outdoor survival, if they're not already part of a group like Scouts or something that teaches them how to light a fire and pitch a tent, then camping with a 14-year-old is a lot easier than camping with a 6-year-old who can't pitch the tent and is just in their way. Craft and repair skills, kind of like, learning to sew, knitting, crochet, leather work, following a pattern, making a dress, financial literacy, because at 13, 14, they're probably getting a card, they're working to a budget maybe, you're giving them spending money, basic first aid, self-care, personal hygiene. I mean, this is the years of puberty. This probably should have been at the top of the list because this is really important. They should be taking care of this themselves with just constant reminders from mum for the teenage boys who forgot to put deodorant on because they can't seem to smell anything. But if you teach it to them when they're 11 to 14, hopefully by the age of 15, they've remembered. Time management skills, because they're going to need those as an adult, but also as a senior student. And then communication, social skills, how to actually make friends, how to deal with it when friends are getting a bit catty, because, again, puberty years. Krystel, I've talked heaps. Do you want to jump in with anything else?
I had a list of things as well. I guess I would just like to emphasize, oh my gosh, so yes for all of those things. I had a 19-year-old that hadn't made, okay, he wasn't 19, but by the time he was sort of 15, 16, and he was needing to make appointments for himself because I was like, dude, you're getting older, you can actually do these things. He really struggled because it wasn't something he had done before. So get in early when you can with those kind of skills, with helping your kids to speak to people they haven't met before, and all of those things. So important. Even things like riding a bike around town. You wouldn't think that was something to think about, but my kids hadn't, because we walk everywhere. So I had to actually actively teach my kids to be able to ride a bike on a road. Those skills are so important. I had jotted down a few other things, like get them involved in things like the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And not many people know about that now, but it's fantastic, and it can really be that catalyst to building some of these new skills and these new life skills. Get them on camps and tramps, get them to do volunteer work. Great way to get them out into the community, getting them to interact with the public, talking to people that they don't know, all of those things. So yeah, magic.
Okay, awesome. I had this. Another reason that this is a really good age to do these things. I mean, there's some things that obviously you can start earlier. Outdoor survival, you might have 8, 9-year-olds that are really keen on learning how to light a fire and you trust them with it. Other people would not want to trust their 8-year-old with matches outdoors. 11 to 14, they can, again, they're developing the brain where they can actually start to think about the consequences of their actions and what might happen if this goes wrong. And they're still learning, and you still have to teach them, but they're at that age where they really can understand that a lot better. If you leave these things too late, and it's never too late, but if your child is going to be concentrating on a qualification pathway and they are really, settling down and needing to study for exams, they've got less time for 2 years. You know, those last 2 years of high school to be doing a lot more of this stuff. You know, that's the time when you might back off and go, hey, you know, one night a week you're cooking. Not, hey, do you want to cook every night? But, you know, sports, they might need to take a break from different sports or just choose one. They might need to be going on less camps, not able to just pick up a workshop on first aid. And they should still have time to do those things, but they can't do all of them. This age, however, as much as you can handle in your family and they can fit in, this is, I'm not saying they need to do everything, but this is the age where it's a really good age to do a lot of this stuff. Okay. And there really is just so much we can introduce our children to. So, like, going to the theatre, music in the parks, listening to an entirely different genre of music for a week. You know, you might be a family that loves pop music, musicals, everyone knows all the words to Hamilton and Moana and all of that. Change it up. Do jazz for a week. Okay, it might not be your cup of tea, but you never know which child is going to be like, oh my gosh, I really like this. I want to learn the saxophone. Go to a concert, go to the opera, join a drama class, visit an art gallery. Visit an art gallery of a type of art that you don't particularly like or know much about, or try a new skill at the community workshop. Now, there will be people listening who are like, well, we do that. That's our kind of family. So great. The next slide is probably for you then. This one is for the sporty people who don't normally go to the theatre and haven't been to an art gallery in years and can't think of the last time they went and listened to a Philharmonic Orchestra. Try that with your kids. If you're the sporty family, go to the Philharmonic Orchestra. If you're the Philharmonic Orchestra family, maybe you should take your kids to the Speedway. Or if you're really into rugby, maybe you should try playing golf. That's on my bucket list. I still haven't done that one. If you are sort of a golfing, very tidy family, maybe try a colour run. You know, go messy. Sign up to the gym. Watch an entirely new sport on TV with popcorn and cheer for a team that you've never cheered for before. Go for a trial day for karate or folk dancing or sword fighting or yoga. And you might take your 14-year-old. They're like, wow, Mum, I never want to do folk dancing again in my life. That's okay. They gave it a go. They've had an experience. They learned something. They learned they don't want to folk dance. Or you might have just found this new love, this new passion that they're really, really interested in. If it's something like hockey or inline hockey, it's really expensive. But them's the breaks of having children. And, you know, there are some things I chose not to expose my children to just in case they really, really fell in love with skiing, because as a family, we can't afford it. I can't afford to go to Snow Planet, let alone drive for 3 hours and do skiing as a whole family. There are some experiences where I'm like, you know, that experience they'll have to do when they're adults. But this one I can do now.
Yep. One great thing, Erin, sorry to interrupt, but with experiences, I don't know what it is like in other towns, but our local council run holiday programs, and I've found that a great way to do really cheap experiences. Like they'll do a day rollerblading, or they'll do, you know, like basketball for the day, or something that the kids haven't done, and it might be $5-10 per kid per day. Makes it super affordable. It's just one day. It's in the holidays. So make sure you keep an eye out for those kind of things. It is really great.
Yeah. And then just some other ideas. Joining a new group of anything, looking through a telescope. I was just naming things. This one at the top, eating at a fancy restaurant. Because if you're a family that doesn't normally do that, that is quite an experience and learning experience with some particular behaviors that as adults we know because we've now done it. But our kids might not have if they've never eaten at a fancy restaurant. Or maybe it's just that they've never gone and eaten at a different style of eating, like yum cha. It's quite different. experiencing an entirely new cultural event or culture. If you've got the money, traveling overseas. I mean, 11 to 14, when it's not going to interfere with schoolwork and exams and things, it's a really good age to go if you can afford it. But you can do those sorts of things in New Zealand too, visiting a church or a mosque or a temple. And you know, it doesn't have to hinder your beliefs to go and see what it's like at a different one. Helping at a volunteer kitchen or at a volunteer event, like Krystel said, baking biscuits to go visit some old people in a rest home, to even see what a rest home is like. Fostering an animal if you're not a pet family. That way you can give them back. So these are all different experiences. And of course, I could have like 100 more slides, which I do not have, on things that you can do with your kids. And they don't have to all be expensive. They don't have to cost money. Just trying out different art around your house. Do some printing. Just print out some different artworks or play different music. That sort of thing. Okay, but there's no award in this for us for the homeschooliest homeschooler or the unschooliest unschooler. So just concentrate on whatever glorious mix of life and learning works for your family. Throw in some experiences that are fun for everyone, but you don't have to stress about trying to do them all because you can't. I mean, I do sometimes make little plans, which is very geeky of me, of, if I was in the royal family and I could appoint a tutor for this and a tutor for that, and I had X amount of money, then, my kids would all learn to ride a horse and sword fight and shoot a gun and experience surfing and snowboarding and every single sport and language there is. But I'm not in the royal family with an excessive amount of money. So that's all good. The things that the kids are going to remember about homeschooling are not going to be what they're doing in their textbooks. Okay, in their workbooks. They're going to be these experiences and these projects that they create or these subjects that they suddenly get really involved in and start collecting rocks, and you have a rock collection everywhere full of gemstones and whatever that they've picked up, and they can name them all. That's the kind of thing that they remember. Now, just changing tack slightly, but not really. Oh, hang on. For a second, take it back. There is a quote from a homeschooling book that I have kind of carried with me my whole life. It's by Susan Wise Bauer. She wrote years ago. She was really big with classical education. So, Well-Trained Mind. She wrote The Well-Trained Mind. It says, your goal as a homeschool parent is to supply the mental pegs on which later information can be hung. Think of an experience most adults have had. You read about a movie star and suddenly you see her name everywhere. You learn a new vocabulary word and instantly notice it sprinkled through all sorts of different texts. You happen across the name of a tiny, obscure foreign country, and in the next few days, you notice a dozen items about it. You might remark to your spouse, what a coincidence. Usually, though, that information has surrounded you all along. The movie star's name, the new word, the foreign country, they were all already in the newspapers at the checkout line. But because the information was unfamiliar, your eyes passed over it without any recognition. Once the information entered your memory, you recognized it and began to accumulate more and more details. And that's what it's like, with homeschooling, with education, teaching. It's giving them a peg to hang more information on, because we pass over new words. We pass over information that we didn't recognize or understand a lot of the time. Once we've seen it, once we've heard it once, we've got that little peg in our head and we can peg a little bit more information about it. We notice it again. So when your kids have learned something about Ukraine, which many, many people knew nothing about 3 years ago, we can start to hang more information. And then you do the same thing with a different topic or something about architecture, or, why do some villas have a big spiky peg on the top of their building? And then once you know that, you see it places. And then you learn more about it, and you mention it to someone else, and then they start to see it, and it's something that's been there the whole time you've never noticed before. So that is the exciting part about this age, because there's not a lot of that information where you must learn this and tick that box. I mean, there is for some of these compulsory subjects that really, matter, these foundational topics. But for everything else in the world, it's just teaching them anything, everything. It doesn't have to be something you already knew. Get it out of a book, watch a video, put on YouTube clip about anything, whatever they get interested in, and whatever you want to get interested in. Something nobody's interested in, but you just thought you'd try it for the day. These are all the things that you can give a go. And they may just come across something that they really love. Now, this comes up every so often. Okay, every couple of years, the argument comes up in school or in the news. What is taught in school for English? Parents are unhappy with the book choice that school is making, or a particular politician is insisting that everyone should study a certain author, or students are complaining because they don't want to read a classic novel. And it's usually senior high school level, and the argument is from everyone. Whether what they want is the more classical method or the more modern, the argument is these older teens should experience it. They should experience this new writing. They should experience that old writing. That's the argument. We should make it compulsory. As homeschoolers, we don't have to worry about what the school is doing. It's our choice what we expose our kids to. It's our choice what we get to introduce them to. It's our responsibility what we introduce them to. And it's our privilege what we get to expose and introduce them to. And I want to make a point about this quote, with this question, because it's just not quite the right question for me. It's not big enough. And what I mean is, the answer for me to this is yes. A resounding yes, with a really big booty but on the end of it. Because Shakespeare should be compulsory, but so should Shel Silverstein. Your kids should learn about Beethoven and Beyonce. They should be listening to podcasts and poetry, reading Dickens and dystopian novels. And they should know who Tu Sudiata, Avia, and Tennyson are. Okay? All of them should be compulsory because we should be doing all the things. But at this younger age, exposing them to all these different poets and authors and experiences, the music, the lyrics, the whole lot. And then when they're senior, then hopefully they know what they like and they can actually choose what they're going to write an essay about if that's what they need to do. But do it all. Do as many as you can, because, it's great if they're reading books about stuff that is their heritage, what they're used to, their culture, or their history. But it's also really, really good and important to read or listen or write about other heritages, other cultures, other points of view. I grew up absolute bookworm, reading mostly girly novels, girl protagonists, usually orphan, 1800s, early 1900s, America and England. So Anna Green Gables, Pollyanna, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, Little House on the Prairie. You name it, if it had a girl character, especially, a strong-willed writing one like Anna Green Gables and Jo March, I was reading it. And that's great. I have no issues with that. I love those books. And that was what was available to me. But we can do more as homeschool parents. We can offer those books and we can say, hey, let's listen to this audiobook about this boy in Samoa. Let's read about this family in Vietnam. We've just read all these amazing books set in World War II in Europe. Why don't we try this one about this war in South Sudan and give our kids other experiences, other points of view, other perspectives around the world? Because then you're finding out where South Sudan is and you're realizing that how people live there and that there's a war there that's been going on for ages and we don't talk about it. And the death tolls in some of these other countries far exceed what the horrors of World War II, but we don't learn about them. So, the world's your oyster, to use a terrible cliche. We can do all of that. Where are we going for time? Oh, 9 o'clock. So, reading, in terms of reading, are they reading a variety of texts? And audiobooks are great. Audiobooks are so good, especially if you've got kids that don't particularly like reading. And if they're in a car, they're a captive market, and everyone can listen to the story and enjoy it. So make use of that. If you listened to the talk last night, you already heard me say, Lord of the Rings on audio is really good. The language is so rich, and you don't skim over it if you're a fast reader, because you can't listen to something. You listen to all the words coming through, and you hear all that amazing language, and it seeps into kids, it seeps into adults, and you start to use it, and you find yourself going, oh, just, upped my language level at adult age. Lord of the Rings is also on audio, 81 hours long. I think that's with The Hobbit, but, that's a lot of driving you can do listening to Lord of the Rings. It's a whole year's worth. But things to think about: novels of different genres, poetry, magazine articles, song lyrics, letters and speeches. Do they understand what they're reading? Can they explain the purpose of the text? Can they give examples of the hooks that the author used to get them interested? These are things that you can talk about with literature, and you shouldn't do this with every single book they read, because that gets a little tiring. But things that you can start to talk about with different books. There are great book lists everywhere. I've got one, but there's also just 101 amazing book lists all over the place with, in my opinion, find one that's got great classic literature and modern literature, because it shouldn't be a choice of we have to only do this. Do both. Get good literature that's written from all the centuries. Then from now on, I've just got a few quotes from some school teachers. In terms of writing, so these are high school teachers talking about kids who are entering high school and things that they wish they already knew. So hopefully it's not too much of a repeat of what Dani said in her what they need to have by 11. But this is kind of what school teachers want kids to have at high school. And as homeschoolers, this might not be relevant. You might have a kid who's not working at high school level in writing, but when they get there, this is the kind of things that if they were at school, teachers would like them to be able to do. I don't understand why kids are arriving at high school unable to write complete sentences. Fragments and run-on sentences are the bane of my existence. We want students who can write a simple paragraph and basic paragraph skills, a topic sentence, explanation example, and a sentence that comments on the example. These are all different teachers. Increasingly, teachers are annoyed that year 9s don't know how to write an email. This goes with that communication skills that I was talking about earlier, not just how to make a phone call and book an appointment. How do they write an email? Instead of, hi, Miss X, I'm sorry I wasn't in class today, thank you, Caleb, we get, hey, what's the homework? 80% of my year 9s, this teacher said, use colloquial language in all their writing. They don't understand that some writing needs to be formal. This book was amazing. Well, my dog didn't think so, but I do. And, it's the kind of writing that they need to be moving out of at high school level if it's for formal writing. Maths life skills. If you've got a kid that's 11 to 14 and they need a break from number, they need a break from their maths workbook, or it's the end of the year and you just want to change things up, there's so many maths life skills that often aren't even included in books, like working with real money. Don't buy fake money. Just use the money you were going to spend on the fake money and give them that to play with and work with real money, but actually maybe really go to the shops and buy things. Do a budget. 24-hour time, Roman numerals, tally marks, how to follow a compass and do coordinates. Here's a really interesting one, but turns out when you get to be an adult and you have to figure out whether the furniture fits or if that's the right size TV, or you just don't want to constantly have arguments with the spouse that has a completely different estimation thing in their head. Learning to estimate a meter or a minute. I'll be home in 20 minutes can mean vastly different things to different people. How to construct a net in 3D shapes. Probability with dice and coin flips. Yahtzee is a really, really good game for this because you're not just doing simple maths of adding, it's probability. Is it better for me to do these 3 6s or to wait till later? Measuring temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit, otherwise we can never understand what the Americans are saying. Measuring liquid, length, scales, baking is where these maths life skills come through. How am I going for time? Do we have questions that we need to answer, Krystel? No one's got questions?
There's none that have come through yet, but I invite people to start putting their questions through so then I can start starring them and have them for Erin and me to answer afterwards.
Yeah. Science. We don't want our kids to be these people. Okay, I was today years old when I learned that rhinos lay eggs because they read something that said eggs successfully harvested from the last remaining northern white rhino. No, they don't lay eggs. Thinking about the time that I said I was distantly related to Marie Curie and a guy said it's pronounced Mariah Curie. Okay, little bits of science that are good to know, that Marie Curie was a scientist, rhinos don't lay eggs, and that, solar panels are not going to use up all the energy from the sun. Okay, science skills. So that you're not these people. And I would add, because I don't know, geography keeps on coming up on my phone. We also don't want to be the people that when they get asked those simple geography questions, like, can you name 3 countries? And they're like, Wisconsin, Springfield, and Los Angeles? No. Good job, little buddy, but no. We don't want to raise our kids to be like that. So for science, an interest in the world around them, curiosity, these are things that, a group of, I've got a lot of teacher friends, so they put together a list for me of things that they want kids to be able to do in terms of science at high school, or have some sort of study of living things in the local environment, that they've actually gone out and tried to learn about some bug and learned about habitats and environment and life cycles and things like that, and knowledge of the solar system, more than just being able to name the planets, but some kind of understanding about the sun and the moon. And these are not things that they need to do just in a workbook or only in a workbook. This is something that they can go and learn about by going to your local planetarium if you've got one, or getting a telescope and using it regularly. Knowing how to light a match, apparently, is a skill that many high schoolers do not have, or to read an analog clock. How to read a graph, how to measure accurately using various tools. That was a really big one by a friend of mine who's a science teacher. Kids who don't know how to use a measuring cup or how to convert measurements, which is your basic maths there. The biggest issue in the science department is kids with low writing ability. They don't use capital letters or punctuation. They want to answer with one-word answers. Too many kids are turning up at high school with the idea that science is boring. It's all around us. If science is boring to you, then what is it that would make it interesting? And find that and teach it differently to your kids. Science is so fascinating. And there are parts of science that, there are topics in science that I don't find as interesting. But there's always some part of science, because it's all around us, that's going to fascinate your children and fascinate you. Every year this happens, I get kids who can't read an analog clock. I have a year 12 sitting AS, that's Cambridge, who never learned, and I can't understand how. So neither can I. Social studies, places in New Zealand, if you're a Kiwi listening, maybe places in Australia if you're an Australian listening. Knowing some world geography, knowing that the world is a globe. don't think anyone's likely to be teaching it's flat earth. How to read a map, having an awareness of historical events in the Treaty of Waitangi or Kate Shepherd. What are some major religions in the world? How to write paragraphs and full sentence answers crops up again. And just knowing about what's going on in the world. You know, they're getting to the age where you can turn on the news and start to discuss it. Even if something really horrible comes up, they're at that age where they're aware that things are going on that are not good in the world. So this is the time to introduce it and to talk it through. Talk about their feelings, talk about what's happening. What difference can we make? Can we make a difference? I've had so many kids that didn't know if Auckland was in the North Island or not. Half my year 9s this year couldn't give me the name of Stewart Island. So, you know, we can do a better job than a lot of primary schools. We can have a map up on the wall and refer to it. We've got more time to teach our kids. See, anything else? Yes. Creativity, the arts. Everywhere in the world has this hierarchy of subjects, and in most countries and in most schools, the arts are near the bottom. Art and music, dance and drama. They don't have to be. I highly, highly recommend this talk. Ken Robertson. TED Talks, Do Schools Kill Creativity? Challenging the Education Paradigm. He said, we are educating people out of their creative capacities. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. Because primary age, they love to draw, they love to dance, they, you know, will be imaginative play for hours, and we teach them out of it. And why do we do that? So, yeah, that's the end. If you're worried, how do I know if they're learning enough or am I doing enough? Then there's a really good website there and a Facebook page, Homeschool Haven. That's one of our own New Zealand homeschoolers there who writes that page with some really good links. So there we go.
Thank you, Erin. I certainly learnt a whole lot. Oh, I feel inspired. Not so much learnt. I knew a lot of this, but hearing it again and the way you presented it has certainly given me a bit of a kick up the pants, to be honest, for my own kids. So thank you for tonight. We do have a few questions. I love this one. I'll pop it up for you. Where did you get the 81 Lord of the Rings audiobook from? I know for our family, we have got Audible. We listen to audiobooks all the time, so it has been it's value for us to actually pay for Audible. So we have it on there. But where do you get yours from?
There, well, that one, I mean, we had that on CD back when our car, you know, took CDs. We don't have it anymore because we don't have anything in the house that still plays CDs. So that was at the time. I mean, I had, you know, 2-year-old and 4-year-olds listening to it while the oldest was like 12. So it worked for the whole family. But yeah, Audible is really good. And there's a lot of free books available on Audible once you have a subscription. Correct. It's also usually you can get a free trial. And once you've got that free trial and you've signed up for some of those books, those free ones, you still can access them even if you cancel your trial. So it's a good thing, you know, if money's tight, sign up for a free trial, have it for a month, make use of some of those books, cancel it, and when you've got money again, you can sign up to Audible again. But I would really recommend that. There are free options. What's the most well-known one? You are listening to a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Now, a lot of libraries, LibriVox, you won't know why I can repeat that, but it's because that little voice comes on at the end of every single chapter. And if you've done LibriVox for a year or two, you decide that Audible is definitely worth it. Libraries are excellent for audiobooks, and Spotify has some too.
It does, and a lot of podcasts as well. So we do a lot of podcasts as well as audiobooks as a family, and they're just, oh my gosh, super, super, super valuable.
Oh, Libby, if you have a library card, most of the major libraries have access to Libby, which means it works like a library. You might have to be on a waiting list to get something, but Libby has Lord of the Rings as audio. Thanks, Carissa. Am I correct in saying we can keep this broad through the intermediate years and then a high school switch over to Cambridge? I would say yes. I think keeping it broad, I know I didn't focus on a lot of English and maths and science in this talk, but those are foundational skills that you keep going with. I kind of did in some ways, if they've got the foundational skills in English, this is the time to introduce them to different kinds of poetry, different kinds of genres of books and Shakespeare and things like that. So that is going broad in those subjects plus other subjects. And then at high school, switch over to Cambridge. Yes, I am of the opinion that if you have prepped them well with a really broad education that is solid on those foundational skills, that they can write an essay, that they've kept up with their maths and things like that. They've got wide literature knowledge, even if it's from audiobooks, not necessarily all from reading, that you can switch into Cambridge at IGCSE level or the year before if you want to get stronger foundational Cambridge skills before you switch to IGCSE. I have a lot of friends who have done it going straight into IGCSE, but they were all Charlotte Mason classical sort of homeschoolers, that kind of philosophy of lots and lots of literature, essay writing, paragraph writing, IEW, those kinds of curriculums that have set them up well for any pathway, whether it's NCEA or Cambridge or GED or whatever it is.
Yeah. And we will be talking about pathways tomorrow night, 7:00. So if you're interested in what pathways you could take for your homeschool or what the options are available in New Zealand, join us 7:00 tomorrow night. Just a little plug. One of the things that I've written down here, with you were talking about world maps and maps, that is actually something that gets commented on a lot in our house, because we actually have a big dining room table, but we have a glass top. And what we did was we put our world map is still under our dining room table. Now, people think this is kind of weird, but kind of cool at the same time. It has invoked so many dinner time conversations. And if it's just
my knee just rolled onto Brazil.
That has actually happened, believe it or not. But it's just if the kids are reading about something and it's the maps there so they can reference it where it is in the world. Usually it's my husband's domain because he knows the world map way better than I do. But just grab a world map, grab a New Zealand map, have it up on the wall, have it somewhere, have it on the back of the toilet door. I don't care, but have it up in your house. It makes a big difference, and it's a great talking point.
And if you are going to put it on a wall, you want it at your children's height. Yes. I mean, at 11 to 14, they're probably taller than you. But if you're talking smaller children, put it at their eye level, not your eye level. That's kind of pointless. Then they're just learning about Antarctica and nothing else. So go for their eye level. But under the table, under a plastic mat or a glass top is amazing. It really, really is. And reference it. You read a story, you see something on the news. Where is that? There is a set of geography songs. If they are 11 to 14, they have gone past the age where they are happy to learn corny songs. But if you've still got primary age kids and you do it in the car, then the others just have to listen. Geography songs are amazing because my children don't at all appreciate the fact that they can recite the former countries of the USSR or the countries in Scandinavia and their capitals. They hate the fact that they know them. But they do, because I just have to start the song and then they're like robots. I can just say it. And they dislike it, but they know them. So it's a win for me.
I like that. Yeah. There is a little question here as well.
What should the average duration per day be for a homeschool?
This is going to vary greatly.
Homeschooling is like parenting.
Yeah.
There's no answer that fits everyone. Everybody is different. And
it's going to change what age your children are as well.
Constantly. If they're 11 to 14, let's stick with that because that's what this talk's on. Those middle ages, age. And you aren't worrying about siblings of different ages as well. Ooh. Still.
Okay, I can speak into this. I'm in that stage. at the moment. I've got a 14, 13, and 11-year-old. So I've got 3 in this age bracket currently. Generally, my 11-year-old's doing probably 2 to 3-ish hours, to be honest. Not solid, but in brackets. My 13 and 14-year-olds are probably doing 3 to 4-ish hours-ish. And this is only 4 days a week. So we actually, as a family, we only homeschool 4 days a week, not 5. Why do I keep losing my camera? Sorry, folks. So take that into consideration as well. And sometimes, honestly, it's sort of 2 to 3 days a week as well.
But Krystel,
that's us.
I just want you to clarify, you mean set bookwork, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So that's the curriculum work, and the rest of the day we are documentaries, we are sports, we are talking, we are music practice is huge in my house. I've got 4 brass players. We're playing board games. I know. 4 brass players.
But no one's counting the amount of time that you spent driving to the library and listening to an audiobook on the way, or how you had a discussion after dinner about what was on the news and the war in Israel. We don't count that when we're counting up hours of homeschooling, but that's so important and so valuable. And it's not written work, it's a discussion at the dinner table, but it's learning, it's education.
Yep.
But I would agree with Krystel, 2-3 hours, might be an hour and a half. It really just depends.
Well, how do we learn as adults as well? We don't have set hours, generally speaking. We don't have set hours. Like, I'm painting my kitchen at the moment. I'm listening to a podcast often while I'm painting my kitchen. I'm learning while I'm doing practical stuff. So all of that counts as well. We've got question from Sharon Skur, list of podcasts we can recommend. We could possibly put one together and put one out. It could be long.
We could. I mean, it's really, really personal. Not personal as in I don't want to share it. Personal as in personal taste. The podcast that I listen to a gin podcast on New Zealand gins because I like gin and it's my friend who's doing it. It's also the only podcast on New Zealand gin. I listen to that. That's probably not what you're meaning. I listen to history ones because that's what I like. My kids, I will sometimes put on science ones. My youngest listens to podcasts on D&D because he likes Dungeons and Dragons. And I couldn't last through half an hour of that. So, yeah, it's really... There's so many educational, really great sciencey history sort of podcasts to listen to, but it depends on the age of your kids and what, whether you even like their voice or not. So we can try. We'll try and put together some favorites.
We can. All right, we should wrap it up there. I just want to say massive thank you tonight, Erin. You have been absolutely fantastic as always. And thank you for those who have joined us live. Those that watch the replay, please enjoy it. Please keep the comments coming in as well, especially for the Friday panel discussion. So I've popped a post up on the Facebook event, so you can pop all your questions on there for the Friday 8 p.m. panel discussion. There will be 4 of us coming. We all come from different perspectives, so it'll be really cool to have that discussion of how we've all done different parts of homeschooling in our journey. So yeah, thank you, Erin, and thank you to Dani and Nikki earlier as well, and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.